Welcome to this episode of Comparison University, Defining Comparisons. Once you've created your project, you're going to be prompted to build your first question. Now, questions are the way through which you tell the platform what comparison or comparisons you want to analyze as part of that project. Now, using the question builder here, we have several prompts to help us think through some common ways of constructing your comparison. First off is how a brand is discussed, and this is really useful for any kind of brand perception monitoring. So looking at customer feedback or looking at online conversations about your brand to understand how you're perceived in the eyes of a particular audience or segment of your audience. How a topic is discussed, this is really useful for topical audience and market research. So for example, you know that your target audiences are having conversations about a topic that is relevant to your brand, such as we are in this case where we're looking at the conversation around video games. We want to understand how that's discussed, so we can go ahead and use this option. How an audience talks is really useful for any kind of demographic, geographic, customer, or audience segmentation. A common example here would be a location-based comparison, comparing consumers in one market versus another, or comparing satisfied customers versus unsatisfied customers to understand the drivers of positive and negative customer experiences. You also have how a brand talks, and this is very similar to the first option we talked about, but instead of looking at brand perception, here we're looking at brand messaging and the words that brands are using to promote their products and services to their target audiences. And of course, if you have a comparison that doesn't fit neatly into one of these categories, you have this sort of catch-all option here about the language of something else. Now in this instance, as we're wanting to learn about the American and British discussion on video games, I'm going to go with how a topic is discussed. I'm going to enter video games and click continue. Here I'm going to be prompted to define the basis of my comparison. So do I want to compare it over time? Do I want to compare consumer groups? Do I want to compare across different channels? And in this instance, what I want to do is I want to compare consumer groups. So I'm going to define my primary consumer group as British gamers and my secondary consumer group as American gamers. So essentially what I've done here is I've told the platform that I want to learn about the discussion on video games, and how I'm going to do this is by comparing conversations of the British audience versus the American audience to understand what makes each of those groups unique and similar from one another. Once you've done that, we can click Finish Question, and that is going to save our comparison to our project, and now we're being prompted to attach our data.